Before we go any further with any of these tools, I want to quickly point out that if you're ever using a tool other than select and you want to go back to your select command, all you have to do is tap spacebar on the keyboard to get back to the select tool. So now that we've nailed down a couple of the basics, we're going to try an exercise here. We're going to try drawing a really simple house. Let's go ahead and start by picking the rectangle tool. Now again, you can either do that by picking it from the tools over here, or you can just tap R on the keyboard, and the rectangle icon there indicates that your rectangle command is active. So let's go ahead and specify a point anywhere on here. Let's left click. Now as you can see over in the bottom right here, you've got these active dimensions that are changing as I'm moving around. So in this case, why don't we go ahead and make it 6,000 millimeters or 6 meters wide by 9,000 millimeters or 9 meters deep. So I'll pick the rectangle tool, left click to specify a point, and begin drawing. Now you might have noticed that this face of a rectangle I'm currently drawing is in blue. That's because this face is coplanar and along the green and red axes. So now if we want to lock this axis to make sure that we're remaining planar, we can go ahead and hit the up key so that now we're officially locked to that axis. So here's where we can specify our exact dimensions that we want this house's building footprint to be. We can go ahead and type 6,000, because we're working in millimeters, comma 9,000, and hit enter. And that will produce a building footprint via rectangle that is to that exact specification. Now we're ready to give this building footprint some volume. So we can use the push-pull tool to do this. We can either select it over here, right here, or tap P for push-pull, select the surface that we want to push-pull and create some volume for, left-click, and drag. Now this is where our ability, once again, to specify an exact measurement is really useful. We're going to go ahead and type 4,500 millimeters. So 4500, we're going to hit enter, and that's going to produce a volume that is now 4,500 millimeters in height. Now it's time for us to draw a roof. Now here's how we're going to do it. We're going to tap L for line. We're going to move our cursor over to the middle of this portion of the top of our house. We're going to pick the midpoint, and when it indicates that we're on midpoint, we know we're there. We're going to left click, and we're going to drag the cursor upwards. We're going to move our mouse so that we're just moving up and along the blue axis. Let's go ahead and specify a height of 1,500 millimeters, 1500, and hit enter. As you can see, that's now produced a line 1,500 millimeters in height. To form our eave, let's go ahead and we're going to keep that line going. We're going to move down to this corner, left click, and then draw another line starting at the top of the roof, left click, move down to this corner, and left click. And then we'll tap spacebar to move back to our select. Great. So we can already see a profile forming, but we don't need this middle line in here. That's just going to cause problems when we try to extrude it. So here's what we're going to do instead. Let's go ahead and grab the erase tool, tap E for erase tool, the pink eraser appears, and then we can go ahead and select that middle line because we don't need it. So perfect. Now we're ready to take this face and use the push-pull to extrude it so that this gable continues along the length of the house. So let's go ahead and tap P for push-pull. We're going to left-click this face, which is now a singular face, left-click, and now we're going to drag our line, that face, over so that it is finally meeting the back face. Now, here is where the built-in snaps in Sketchup are really useful. If we bring our cursor towards this back face that we're trying to extrude this to, we're going to make a point of bringing our cursor so that it's somewhere along this edge, because as you can see, then it snaps in such a way that that push-pull extrusion actually terminates at that back wall of this building. Let's go ahead and left click. And now we've completed that extrusion. Great. Let's go ahead and clean these lines up a little bit more here. Now we want to give this roof a little bit more profile so that it has some soffits and it'll be a little bit more massed on top of the walls than it currently is. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and use the offset tool. Offsets, like we discussed in AutoCAD, are geometric displacements that are essentially scaled bigger or smaller versions of whatever shape we're displacing from. Let's go ahead and move over to the toolbar and select offsets. Let's go over to the toolbar here and select the offset command. Let's left click and we'll move over to the face that we want to offset. We will specify that yes, indeed, this is the face that we're hoping to offset for right now. Let's go ahead and left click. And as you can see, it's going to create a scaled bigger or smaller version of that geometric shape that we're hoping to offset. So because we want these to be fairly decently sized soffits, why don't we specify an offset distance of 250 millimeters. So let's go ahead and type 250 and hit enter. And just like that, we've already got the profile of some soffits and a raised roof system forming. But before we go any further, let's clean some of these lines up a little bit more. Tap E for erase, and we can tap this line and this line, because again, we don't really need those at this stage and we want to keep our drawing nice and clean. So now that we have this singular face clean and free of any unnecessary lines, let's go ahead and grab the push-pull tool, tap P for push-pull, and we're going to select this face, left click, and drag. And once again, we're going to make sure that's meeting that back wall by picking a point on edge. Let's left click, and there we have it. Now, as you can probably picture, most roofs have a bit of a gabled form as an offset. So let's go ahead and create one, again, using the push-pull tool for each of these faces here and back here. So let's tap P for push-pull, select that face, left click, and let's pull it out a reasonable 400 millimeters. So type 400, hit enter. We can orbit around to the other side, left click this face as well, and tap 400 and enter, just like that. So now this roof has gabled outwards as an offset on both the front and back of the house. This is already looking way more like a house. So now we're going to add some doors and windows to this house as well. As you might recall from our last video, drawing a door in SketchUp is pretty easy, as the rectangle tool will do a fair bit of the work for us. Let's try it out. Let's go ahead and type R for rectangle, and we're going to pick a point on the bottom edge of one of our wall faces. Here seems like a fine spot. So we're going to left click, tap, and then essentially motion outwards to essentially map out where our door could go. So why don't we give this door a dimension of 1200 millimeters wide by 3000 millimeters high. So to do this, we're just going to type 1200, comma, 3000 and hit enter. And now that has produced that door to those exact specifications. Perfect. But this door is missing something. It needs a door frame. So here's what we're going to do about that. We're going to use our offset tool again. Now, this is where it'll be really useful for you to have some common building standards sort of by your side as you do this, so that you can look up some of these case-by-case dimensions. But for now, we're going to say that if this is going to be like a 2-inch door frame we're going to draw here, it'll be like 50.8 millimeters. So we're going to grab our offset tool from right over here. Let's left click. We'll pick this door that we want to offset to make a door frame. Left click. And we're going to move our cursor outwards. 50.8. We're going to type that in, 50.8, and hit enter. So just like that, we've now got a 2-inch or 50.8 millimeter door frame. Let's grab the erase tool and clean up this stuff on the underside that we just don't need. E, let's click. We'll clean up these extra lines, just like so. Great. But this door frame still needs something else. It needs a little bit of volume, as it would be framed and it would protrude a little bit from the wall face. So once again, let's grab our push-pull, tap P, select the face of the frame, left click, and we'll say that this door frame is going to protrude an inch or 25.4 millimeters away from the wall face. So let's type 25.4 and hit enter. Now just like that, we've already used a couple simple tools to create a door frame. Now let's say we want to draw a window that has the same header height as this door frame right over here. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and we're going to use our guidelines, and we're going to get to those with the tape measure tool. And I'll show you how. Let's go ahead and move over here and tap the tape measure icon. Let's left click. Now the tape measure tool is really great. Here's why. For starters, it's really handy for just measuring things on a case-by-case basis in your SketchUp. Let's say I want to know the width of this door frame. I can do that by selecting this corner over here, left click and tap, and then dragging over and hovering over this corner over here, and I can see that this is 1302 millimeters. Great, so that's perfect, but for now, we want to actually draw some construction guidelines, and the tape measure tool can help us get to that. Here's how it's done. We're going to go over to this wall face where we actually want those guidelines to be so that we know that the header heights are matching. So let's pick the bottom of this wall face. We're going to left click, tap, and we're going to start motioning up the wall along the blue axis. Now, here's where we're also going to use our keyboard a little bit. We're going to tap Control, and as you can see, that's producing an actual guideline. Now that guideline doesn't occupy any physical form in this model. We're not really drawing anything. It's just there to be a little bit of a 3D ruler for us to work from. So I'm going to hold Shift down to make sure we're still aligning along the correct axis. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scroll over to this top of the door frame. And as you can see, that will make it so that this guideline that we're drawing is concurrent with it. So I will left click, and just like that, I've now got a guideline that is the same height as the top of this door frame. Now let's say from here, I want to define how high I want this window to be. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to left click this first guideline that we just created. I'll left click, and because I still have Control Guideline active on the tape measure tool, I can move downwards and essentially define just how high I want the bottom side of the window to be. So if I hold Shift down, I'll be able to move around as I please. And then if I type, I don't know, let's make this a 1500 millimeter high window, 1500, and hit enter. Now we've got a guideline for the top and bottom of this window. Now let's say we want to specify exactly where this window will be in relation to this corner of the house. Well, we can do that very easily. We can move over to this corner. Let's left click this edge, tap, and as you can see, this is where the inferencing is really useful, because we can see that as we move along the green axis, that's us moving in the right direction. Let's go ahead and type 600 millimeters, 600, and hit enter. And we'll say that's the distance from the corner that our window is starting. Now, as far as the window's width goes, we can define that by drawing one more guideline. Let's left click. We will drag and make sure that we're aligning with the green axis. And we can type, let's make this window a little bit wider. Let's make it 2000 millimeters. So type 2000 and hit enter. So now our guidelines, as you can see, have helped us create almost like a ruler that we're going to be able to trace around. So let's go ahead and jump over to our rectangle tool. Now that we have these guidelines, we'll type R. We'll move over to this top corner right here. And as you can see, SketchUp knows we're trying to work off of these guidelines. So let's left click and we'll drag to meet this corner of the guidelines. We'll left click. And just like that, if we move over to the select tool, now that one face has become two faces. Now we're going to go ahead and offset this the same amount that we offset this door frame over here. So let's grab the offset tool, which is right over here, left click. Let's make sure we're selecting on this face, left click once more, and we'll specify 50.8, type that in and hit enter. Grab the push pull tool, grab the face we just defined with the offset, left click, and type 25.4, so it's the same thickness as the frame we just dealt with on the door, and hit enter. Perfect. So now that we've been able to define that window based on our guidelines, we can go ahead and delete these. And to delete your guidelines, you can either use the eraser tool if you want to, or you can just left click and drag to select them. And now that they're highlighted in blue, you can see SketchUp knows we want to select them, and then we can just hit delete. Either one is perfectly acceptable. Now this is looking more and more like a house all the time, but it's still looking pretty plain. So here's what we're going to do about this. Many houses have some sort of a foundation trim that runs just above the bottom of the wall. So we're going to go ahead and use our move tool to essentially copy one in. Here's how we're going to do it. First, we're going to go ahead and select all the lines that we want to do a move and copy of. Let's hold shift down and then left click each of these faces that essentially excludes the door or door frame material. And once we have everything selected, and it's looking something like this, then we're going to tap M for move. Now watch what happens. If I pick this bottom point and try to left click and drag, as you can see, it starts really warping the geometry. It's really not what we want. So what we're going to do as an alternative to that is we're going to left click that point and we're going to tap Control. Now that's a control copy move. What that does is that essentially produces a copy of that line that we're trying to move and allows us to move it as we want to, while leaving the original line that we're copying from where it is. So once more, I'm going to show you how that's done. Let's go ahead and hold shift down and select each face we want to do a control copy move of. We'll orbit up a little bit. We'll tap M for move. We'll specify the point that we want to move from. Let's left click, and as we'll start dragging up the blue axis because that's the right direction, but then we're going to tap Control. And then we're just moving a copy of that line as opposed to the baseline itself. Let's go ahead and specify a height of 1200 millimeters and hit enter. And just like that, we've now got a foundation trim that has also produced yet another split. Now, this is all looking good. However, things are still looking pretty plain. So now is a good time for us to do something a little bit different in SketchUp. We're going to start applying some materials. To get to your materials, you can move over to your default tray, and materials should be one of the first options you see. If that's not the case, you can move up to your window dropdown, move over to default tray, and just make sure the materials is checked. If it isn't, left click it to select it and check it, and then it should appear in your default menu. So go ahead and move over to your default tray, left click materials, and from here you can move to the materials dropdown, and you'll see we have plenty of different options for built-in materials in SketchUp that you have already at your disposal. So for the foundation material, let's go ahead and pick asphalt and concrete. We'll see what it has for us there. So to apply a material, you move around until you find a material that you like. You left click, tap left click, then you drag your cursor over to your model with the paint bucket. The paint bucket indicates that the materials are ready to be applied. So let's go ahead and apply some. To apply a material, you move over a face in your SketchUp model and you left click. You tap left click. You orbit around and you can essentially paint any surface, as long as it's a closed face, that you want. We'll pick up different material for the siding. Let's see what else we have in here. Let's move over to the drop down, left click. We'll move down to brick cladding and siding. Let's left click and we'll see what we have here. Perfect. Why don't we try cladding, siding, white? Let's left click, move over to our model with the paint bucket activated, and left click every surface that we essentially want to paint this material onto. Perfect. Now let's do something a little bit different for the glass in here. You'll notice that if you go over to your material drop down, you left click, you can move down, and as you can see, glass and mirrors is an option. Let's left click it. If we pick translucent, SketchUp actually offers a material where if we left click this one and move it over and paint the window like this, it actually produces a clear material that you can see through. Now let's say that we're happy with these materials that I've gone through and picked for our house. But let's say that I want to really make sure that all of these components that we've agreed on now are staying organized. The last tool I'll show you in this video here is the group tool. And the group tool, again, is just going to be really useful for your organization. It's very easily used. Here's how it's done. We're going to left click and hold and drag a selection window over everything that we just worked on and then release. So now we've got everything selected. We're going to right click and we're going to move down to make group. Now, once you have something saved as a group, that doesn't mean you can't edit it. If you want to edit anything in there, you just select the group, you can double click, and then you can edit and adjust things as you wish. And then to escape from working inside of that group, you just left click twice anywhere outside of it. But the idea there is really just to make sure we're keeping our materials and our faces organized in one complete package, and that's what group is really useful for.